And we are live. Welcome everybody again. My name is Marty Atkinson. I am the moderator for today's session. I'm delighted you could all make it to Free to Text, How Open Text and Disrupting Publishing and Improving Outcomes by Eric Frank. Eric is the president and co-founder of Flat World Knowledge, the largest publisher of free and open college textbooks for students worldwide. Flat World has raised $30 million in venture capital in the past 2 years, which is amazing in this economy. And its open textbooks have been formally adopted by over 2,000 faculty at 800 universities in 44 countries. The company has launched a classic disruptive model in the face of the $8 billion U.S. textbook publishing market. Outsell, an information industry analyst group, recently named Flat World one of the 30 to watch in 2011, alongside Apple, Facebook, Google, Thomson Reuters, and others. Wow, that's some press. Enough of me. Eric, it's all yours.
That's great. Thank you so much, Marty, and welcome to everybody. Thanks for sharing some of your day with us. You know, when we started Flat World Knowledge, my co-founder Jeff and I kind of started with this basic principle in mind, that education is the black gold of the 21st century, that those with it will continue to improve their standard of living. Those who are locked out of access to it will continue to fall further behind. We certainly see that in lots of data coming out in the United States, indicating that by 2020, 80% of jobs, for example, will require a college degree of some kind, and by current estimates, 40% of the population will hold that degree unless something changes. And what we think is really an opportunity to close that gap is the fact that technology has really exploded as an enabler of access to high-quality education. And the issue is really no longer whether the technology is there for us to take advantage of. It's really whether the business models that we have in place today are going to adapt and really get out of the way of the progress that's possible through the integration of technology in smart ways. And so I really think that in many ways the problems today are really business model-oriented problems more than anything. I'm specifically going to speak about that business model problem as it manifests itself in the textbook industry. I come to Flat World with about 15 years of textbook publishing experience with Thomson and then with Pearson, where I was director of marketing. My co-founder was editorial director at Pearson and editor-in-chief at McGraw-Hill, so we've been in the industry a long time. And the way we saw the problem manifesting itself was sort of over time. And so in the 1980s, I think of that decade as the decade of feet on the street, or basically it was a decade where there were 67 academic textbook publishing companies, and they merged into a fairly small number in the 80s, and they competed with one another for market share based on these increasingly large and professional sales organizations. And that added lots of cost to the textbook without really increasing its value to the end user. By the time we went into the 90s, that consolidation had gone to the nth degree, and there were really 4 significant publishers left. And they all had relatively similarly sized sales organizations, and so thus no competitive advantage. So I think of the 90s really as the decade of the nuclear arms race of supplements. That was when you saw an explosion of availability of various supplements with the book, so that the rep could walk in and say, I have X and they don't have it, I have Y, they don't have it, and that's why you should adopt. That added some negligible value to the end user, but continued to drive up costs of the product through the 90s. And that brought us to sort of the 2000s, where all of a sudden there was a significant value gap in the marketplace between students on the one hand, who are increasingly wired and becoming increasingly networked and sophisticated, but at the same time demographically brought less family income to college than any generation before them, and worked more hours while they were in college than any generation before them. And so you had the student on one side of that value gap, and on the other side of that value gap, you had a product that hadn't changed that much, other than it had become increasingly inaccessible to more and more students. And numbers were telling us that about 60% of students were buying the textbook, and about 40% by the late 2000s were opting out of purchasing a textbook at all. And you can see here that some of the big introductory market textbooks have crossed the what was probably an unimaginable threshold of $200 not just a few years ago. And that's becoming closer and closer to the norm. If you look at it over time, it's manifested itself alongside the rise in tuition and fees, and therefore adding to the overall problem of higher ed affordability. If you look at that, at the 20-year line of consumer price index on the bottom, and the top is tuition and fees. The bottom or the middle line there is textbooks. So lots of financial pain for the student trying to access that higher education degree. And that pain is not evenly distributed. The Department of Ed estimates that if you're at a 2-year public institution, you're paying X for tuition and fees, you're paying 72% of X for your textbooks, or almost as much for books as you're paying for the rest of your education. 26% of X if you're at a 4-year public institution. And I think both of those numbers strike most people as absurdly sort of out of skew with the value of the textbook within the overall scheme of education. In California, the problem's even worse in the sense that California has done an excellent job of keeping tuition and fees low, and so students pay significantly more for books than they pay for colleges, and they also tend to pay a little bit more than the national average. If you look at a national average for textbooks and supplies in California, in the community college system, it's $1,566. It peaks at $1,581 in the Cal State system. And it's having a material impact on students. The Gates Foundation recently funded a study, and they assessed 600 students and why they dropped out of college. And the two reasons that jumped out of the report as significant were the two you see here. The cost of textbooks and other fees besides tuition affected me financially, and I had to work as well, and it was too stressful trying to do both. And all of that, of course, is happening in an environment where much of that textbook spending is actually adding to student debt. They're using their loans to purchase their textbooks, which means they're actually paying significantly more than what it appears on the face of it. And for those of you who saw the article last month in the New York Times, you'll know that college debt has surpassed credit card debt in the United States for the first time in history, and it exceeds $1 trillion in debt. Students who have children now will still be paying for their own education at the time they start trying to help pay for their children's education for the first time in America. So we have this value gap, and what's happening in the industry is students are responding by turning to the internet, which arrived at the same time as that value gap in the early 2000s. And they increasingly find an alternative to buying a new book, whether that's a used book that they can now buy at Amazon or Craigslist, whether it's a global gray market edition that was sold overseas by a publisher at lower costs and then resold back to students in the United States via the internet, whether it's a rented book that the student rents for a semester and then sends back, or whether it's increasingly a pirated copy of a textbook. We've seen an explosion of piracy in the industry. And all of those things meant that the publishers were selling less new units of books every year. And as a result, they were responding defensively. Well, we have less buyers, so how do we preserve revenue? Well, we charge more for the books we're still selling, so prices spiked from 4 or 5% a year increases to over 10% a year now. Start to bundle and customize, try to create a unique ISBN at every college so that when the student or bookstore tried to look online, they couldn't find any of those things you see on the left. They could only find the new book available from the publisher. And of course, everybody's favorite, the new edition, started to come out every 18 months instead of every 4 years as a way of trying to combat all these alternatives that students were finding online. And so, you know, at the end of the day, all of that is bad enough, and then if you add sort of all the challenges, and I'm not even going to begin to try to list them all, you know them better than I, of teaching online, it gets even worse, whether that's, you know, schools needing to bring quality courses up online fast and are under pressure to do it cheaply, whether it's the excessively more crazy schedules of students who are online, who are even typically balancing more life versus school issues, lots of fluid entry, exit, and re-entry into curricula issues online, courses that are not standard length courses being taught more frequently, thus they're off cycle with bookstores, they're off cycle with sort of the apparatus of the university, students that are distributed all over the place, which means you have book distribution problems, and generally skewed towards older learners, meaning you have people bringing different experiences into the classroom, and therefore, sometimes traditional textbook content isn't quite appropriate. So you have all kinds of additional challenges online. And I guess the sum of all that is nobody's very happy, I think, the state of the union of the textbook industry today. Students are angry and frustrated. I think faculty feel like unwilling participants in a market that's not working correctly anymore. And authors are actually only paid a royalty when a new book is sold. And so as new book sales are increasingly displaced by the alternatives I described, authors are watching their royalties erode and are kind of wondering what the future of this industry is for them. And so that kind of brings us to the topic of the day, which is a solution that's really beginning to emerge in a really rapid way, which is free and open textbooks. And I'm going to begin by first trying to define what is open. And I think it's a fairly misunderstood term when it's placed into the context of something like a textbook. And so basically we've always lived in a world of copyright. When a work like a textbook is published, it's completed, it is instantly protected by copyright protection. And that remains the case under the world of open licensing. However, when a copyrighted textbook was published, it was published with a license. And that license is called all rights reserved. We're all familiar with it. We just don't usually think of it as kind of a user license that we get. But it is indeed a user license that says all rights are reserved to the holder of that copyright. So if you were the copyright holder, whether you were a publisher or an author, and you wanted to take advantage of technology and the internet and let your users do more with your material, like a textbook, be able to modify it, reorganize, insert links into it, add your own material to it, mix it together with something else, the only choice you really had was to publish it all at the other end of the legal spectrum, which is put it in the public domain. And there, it's essentially a no rights reserved. You've given up all your rights. It's now owned by the public, and the public can do anything with it. Generally an untenable solution for most. So as the internet has become sort of an increasingly important medium for creating content, for distributing it, for people interacting with it and consuming it, legal scholars thought, it's time for something in the middle. And that something in the middle is really simply thought of as a set of open licenses on top of copyrighted works where some rights are reserved to the copyright holder and some rights are given to the end user. And so it's a much more flexible middle ground between all rights reserved and no rights reserved. And the rights generally conveyed from the copyright holder to the user that the user generally does not have under the world of all rights reserved are the ones you see here. I think of them as the 5 R's of open. So the first is the right to reuse material. It's perfectly legal to copy and to reuse verbatim copies of open textbooks, for example. You could go into Kinko's, take an open textbook, drop it on a printer, copy it, and it's perfectly legal, whereas an all rights reserved book, as you know, it is not. You have the right, importantly, I think, to revise and to remix that material. So you have the right to change it, to modify it to better suit your curriculum, whether that's to include links to things of local interest, to make a book more culturally relevant to your area, your geographic area, whether it's to take local examples and replace the ones in the book with things your students can relate to, whether that's to change the table of contents to fit your syllabus. Whatever it is, you have the right to revise and to remix materials from other sources into it to create something new. And you have the right to redistribute that new thing. So perfectly legal to take this modified version and redistribute it to anybody that you want to. And then ultimately, the end user, the student, has the right to free access to that material in some way, shape, or form, generally online, but it could be others. Somebody just asked about translations or made a comment. It's indeed the case that one also has the legal right to translate a work and to make that translation available under the open license without seeking explicit permissions for that. They're granted by the license. So that's really what open is. where do open textbooks come from? Well, they started with individuals. So I think you first, like many movements, saw frustrated faculty saying, I don't like the current publishing system. There's new options emerging. I'm going to make my material available under an open license. And so they just began to individually put an open license on their work, put it up on the internet, and make it available for sale. For download, and in some cases for sale at places like Lulu, where if you wanted a print copy, you'd be able to purchase one. So we saw that going on for really the last decade, although it's continuing to increase in terms of its pace. And then along came aggregators or platforms, mostly funded by foundations, who said if individuals are going to make these things available, we should put them all in one place. We should make them easily searchable by discipline or subject. We should allow people to remix material, to take something from A and put it together with something from B, to create something new. We should try to connect it to print-on-demand technology for people who want print copies, etc. And so you saw the rise of things like Connections, which was started out of Rice University. It has something on the order of 18,000 unique individual educational modules available today. Or Merlot out of the Cal State system, which has a mix of both openly licensed material and traditional copyrighted, all rights reserved protected material. So when you search for something in Merlot, it'll also tell you what license has been applied to that work, which will tell you what your rights are. And then much more recently, you saw the entry of players like the company that I co-founded, Flat World Knowledge, which is really a professional commercial publisher who's trying to build a new publishing or business model around open textbooks. And so what I wanted to do to give you a sense of what's possible when you apply an open license to something like a commercial textbook, what's possible and what could the market potentially look like. And so I'm going to walk you through a case study, a sort of sustainable, self-funding open textbook model in which authors make money, and there's a pool of funds available for continuous textbook development, and yet all of those R's of open are available to the end user. So the model that we employ, for example, has these three core components. First, publish great textbooks. We still believe in the power of authorship. Openly license those textbooks to convey those 5 R's to you. And then to give students lots of different choices about how they want to consume the content, because all students are not the same, and they don't all have the same lifestyle, they don't all have the same learning style. And so I'll walk you through these in a little bit more detail. By great textbooks, I really just mean that we publish books the way the industry has always done it. So we're a publisher. We're not an aggregator of other people's books, but we go out, we sign a top scholar or a top expert or author in his or her field, to write an exclusive new textbook for Flat World Knowledge. We professionally develop it, meaning we peer review it, we editorially develop it, we accuracy check it, we professionally illustrate it, all of the things that publishers do to add value to an author's original ideas. And then we support it by providing some key supplements, things like test banks for learning management systems, PowerPoint slides, desk copies, instructor's manuals, not a million things, but a few key critical resources. So in all of that respect, I think it's just about getting on the playing field with a high-quality product comparable to something somebody might be using from a traditional publisher today. And I think if you look at the early user base, while we have a very wide range of users, you can certainly see that some of the sort of premier institutions in the United States are early adopters of open textbooks, indicating that I think it's indeed possible to produce high-quality textbook content under a very different model. So that very different model really starts now, and that's with the publication of the book. And when we publish a book, we publish it openly, which means that we put a Creative Commons open license on it, thereby transferring those 5 R's that I talked about to the user, the right to reuse, to redistribute, to revise, to remix, and the right for students to access it for free. And we provide a technology platform that makes it possible for a faculty member to easily take advantage of that license and to be able to make modifications to a textbook. So for example, if you went to our catalog today and you found a book you were interested in potentially using, like this Introduction to Psychology book, for example, you could simply click Customize this book. And what that will do is take you into a book editor where you can rearrange chapters of the book, you can rearrange sections, edit the text, insert new content into the book, and basically you do that by simply clicking. If you wanted to reorganize, say, a table of contents, you could click and drag the content into a new location, drag and drop it. If you wanted to delete things, you could simply click a trash can, and it would delete a chapter or section you don't want to cover. If you wanted to edit a section of content, you could click on that section, and it would load that section of content in the editing environment on the right, at which point you could just click on anything that you want to click to be able to edit it. If you go in between paragraphs, you could add things. So you could insert new paragraphs, you could insert bulleted lists, numbered lists, and if you go closer to the bottom of that list, you see you can insert Word documents and PDFs. You can insert video clips directly into the book, so lots of flexibility. You can even edit existing content down to the word level. So by clicking on any existing paragraph, you open up a integrated Word editor, and you're able to immediately add links to the internet, establish key terms with their definitions that'll show up in the margins, add your own sentences and material to that paragraph. And you can even create new content really simply. So let's say I wanted to take the psychology book and I wanted to add a new section, and I wanted to take advantage of what's going on in the Middle East to try to motivate the study of psychology a little bit. So in this whole chapter on emotions and motivations, I want to create a new section by clicking on that and creating a section called the Psychology of Protest and clicking Save. And I start building a new section of content. And it's really as easy as just cutting and pasting content in here or typing. So if I wanted to insert some learning objectives first, I could type those in or paste them in. Excuse me. Click Save. Maybe I want to add a paragraph of text here about some research about the psychology of protest, and go ahead and save that. And then you can see in this paragraph, I referenced a video below the Egyptian protest. So I could go to YouTube, find a video, and say I want to upload a video, and go to the video toolbox. So I give it a title, cut and paste the URL from YouTube or Blip TV, describe it, provide a citation, click the Save button, and I now have integrated a video. And then let's just conclude our section here with some questions about that video. So I include some exercises, and go ahead and put some video comprehension check exercises in and click Save, and I'm done. So let's say I've now made some changes to the existing book. I've added my own section of content, and I want to save my changes. When you click the Save button down on the lower left, what happens immediately is that the formatting of the textbook all around it is immediately applied to the changes or the additions that you've made, so that it looks like an integrated textbook, not like a course pack with formatting and various things from different places. So you can get a really professional, seamless-looking product in absolutely no time just by clicking the Save button. When you're ready to publish and adopt the book, you can go ahead and click that button. And I see some questions coming in about copyright and stuff, and I will actually get to those if you'll just keep them there. We'll come back around and answer those questions. When you click Publish, what happens in the background is the book is rebuilt. So the table of contents is regenerated, the index is regenerated to get page references correct, pagination is renumbered, and then instantly a bunch of different formats of the book are produced automatically and within minutes. So web books, HTML, softcover books, which is PDF files that get sent to our print-on-demand partner, which is R.R. Donnelley. Print-it-yourself books, PDFs that are easily downloadable to a local hard drive. Books for handheld readers, so EPUB and .mobi files, which fit the iPad, Kindle, Sony Reader, and basically every handheld reader out there. Audio books are not automatically generated. We create those in the studio. They are automatically reorganized, and material that you delete is deleted. But if you add original material, we can't get that today directly into the audio book. And then we also automatically produce accessible versions, Daisy readable and digital Braille versions for students who have print or learning disabilities. All of those things are instantly available, and the model is to let students go ahead and select the format and the price, as you'll see in a minute, that works best for them. So in many respects, open on the one hand is really about what you see Dr. Hunt talking about here, which is getting closer to the perfect book for one's class, as opposed to trying to create your class and mold it around what the book might be doing. The next part about open is the affordability issue for students. And so there we'll go to the last part of the model, which is student choices. So the first choice that a student has is to read a book for free. They literally can go to the book on our site and access the entire thing cover to cover. Any of you could do that today and read the entire thing for free. And it's a pretty rich experience. It's not a stripped down experience. It actually has search capability. It has rollover definitions of key terms. It's got note-taking capabilities, etc. And we also make the accessible versions, the DAISY readable and digital Braille versions, available at no cost, so that every student in that class is on an equal playing field and has access to the material. So that's where we start, is with a free book. But a lot of students don't want to read online. They prefer getting offline, not having an internet connection, being more mobile and more portable. And so the way we make money today, because we are a for-profit company, and as Marty said in the introduction, have raised a tremendous amount of money to try to build the company profitably, is to allow students to choose different formats that they would pay for. So for example, they could buy a softcover book today, and they could get it in their bookstore or direct on our website. They could get that book in black and white for as low as $35, in color for $70. They can buy the audio book by the book or chapter. They can buy downloadable PDFs for $25 or just a chapter for $250. They can buy $25. They get the Mobi and the EPUB format, so they can put it on any reader. They can get a version for their iPhone, and of course the free web and accessible versions are always available to everyone. So they have oftentimes multiple access, which students tell us they frequently use. They may buy a print book, but they still reference the online book when they're on their 15-minute break at work and they want to read a section. Or they'll utilize the free book, but they'll purchase a few PDF chapters along the way because they want to print them and bring them somewhere. So I will continue on to the last thing that we sell, which is study aids. And so we sell audio study guides, online quizzes, digital flashcards, and students have the option to purchase those. I do want to address one quick question that's sort of in the context here as I go, and I'll come back around to some others. Somebody asked a question about whether one could add inaccurate content into the textbook. And so one thing to be clear about is that this isn't a wiki model where there's one core book and that multiple people are editing that core book. What's happening is you're coming to the core book as a faculty member and adopting that book, and then you're making changes for your own course. And so the next professor that would come along would make changes to the original book for their own course. And so you're really not getting one book that's being constantly modified by different people that you don't have control over. So I just wanted to make that clarification sort of as we go, and we can talk about that issue a little more. So ultimately the message is your professor chose the book, you choose the format and price, and you can see that today students are reading, 44% of them read free online only, and 56% are choosing to purchase one of the purchasable formats that I described. So we estimate an average of about $80 savings per student per course based on a $100 spend on a traditional textbook versus what averages out to be a $20 per student spend with a Flat World book when you blend free and paid use together. I'll briefly mention a second model, which you're starting to see more of, both from us, but also from some traditional publishers, which is really a seat license model for content, to think about textbooks differently. And so what you see is the model I just described. But with the seat license model, what happens is it's still the same book, still the open licensing, but the institution is actually purchasing access for students in bulk. They're buying X number of seats for students to be able to utilize. And when a student enters a course, that means that they get access to all the digital formats and study aids of the book, which Flat World can host or the college can host locally inside of its own LMS. And then the student can continue to have options for print, whether that's including the print books in the license, which we see sometimes, or whether that's making a link optional for the student to be able to purchase print on their own from the bookstore or directly online. Just to give you a sort of sense of how that works, so for example, at Virginia State, the 8 introductory required business courses in their business degree all use a Flat World open textbook. So the school pays $20 per student per course. They collect that back from the students through a course fee. And for that $20, the student logs into the course and has complete access to everything that I described earlier. And if the professor uses 2 books in the class, it doesn't matter. It's still the same $20. They're just paying really for content access for 1 semester for a course. I'll skip some of the details of how that works. And just get to sort of our last segment here, which is better outcomes. I think that the open model really does have offer opportunity for all the primary constituents in this market. I mean, for authors, it offers them a really interesting opportunity to earn equal or greater income. And I think I have some slides coming up in a minute that just show that in more detail, so I'll hold on to why. But it also offers them an opportunity to gain share. So if you're a new author trying to break into a highly competitive market, you're always looking for an advantage. And if you can produce the same high-quality book, but make it available under an optimal model for customers, then you have an opportunity to gain share more quickly. To keep your customers longer, as people make changes to a book, they become increasingly satisfied with that book in their course and tend to stay longer. Our authors get lots of behavioral data, so they can see how people are using the book. They can see what kinds of changes people make. And therefore, it gives them a huge amount of data to actually become better authors. And then finally, they feel good about the social impact that they're making by making their material openly available. For faculty or in some cases curriculum developers, certainly you get to begin with a book that's of comparable quality to a book that you might be using. But then you add this unprecedented level of control over both the content, control over things like timing of new editions. We'll publish them, but we tell our customers, here it is, and customers can decide if and when they want to shift to new editions. Of course, you're solving the affordability and access problem for students when you adopt an open textbook. And then there's the issue of being able to more deeply integrate these into your learning management system or a course. You could actually think about our book as a set of content. Every section has its own unique URL, and so you could break that up and rebuild it into your course as a series of readings, and that doesn't even look like a textbook anymore. And then finally, for students, they get free access, which of course is a big deal, affordable choices if they don't want to be online. Immediate access, so in an online course, they might register the day before. They've got the book the first minute they start the course. Longevity, meaning we don't DRM protect any of this stuff, and so it's available for the student on their bookshelf in perpetuity. It's easier for them to deal with distribution in a distance learning environment. They can just access everything online, and if they own a print book, it can be sent directly to them. And then finally, potentially greater success. So there's some interesting data that we've seen coming out of Cal State Northridge, Virginia State. There's a study underway in the state of Ohio through the University System of Ohio's Chancellor's Office now with 1,000 students using open textbooks. But this data came out of Cerritos College, and it was an article published in Community College Weekly by Dr. Linda Lacey, who's the president there. So Cerritos had a hypothesis that if the high cost of textbooks was actually one of the things leading to greater dropout rates, then if you remove that barrier, students might stay in greater numbers. And so they piloted 3 introductory open textbooks, didn't change anything about the course other than the book in use, and you can see the results here, which were increases in course completion rates in those 3 courses between 10 and 15%, and actually a modest, probably statistically insignificant uptick in GPA, but at least you certainly didn't see any backward slide in GPA. And we've seen corroborative data now starting to come out of some other places. Sort of last question, is this sustainable? And I think it is. If you look at the basic core model, in a traditional adoption, with 100 students, about 56 or 60 students will buy a book and 40 will go without. And then you watch the sales of a traditional textbook drop off precipitously each semester as used books and others can't take over. With a flat world model or an open textbook model, you generally see a little bit less students buying because more are using free, but you see a much more consistent income line or revenue line over the course of those semesters because there's much smaller of a secondhand or used market. So we generate almost as much income over 4 semesters as a traditional publisher. And then, of course, we pay our authors a higher royalty rate. So we pay a 20% royalty rate versus a 13% rate for the industry. So at the beginning, our authors are earning less income, but as their sales continue to be steady and we pay them a higher rate, about the end of the 4th semester of their book being used, an author actually can walk away from an adoption with more income, even though their book is open and free. So anyway, that's the sort of basic core model. We've got 112 authors under contract. Over 2,000 faculty have adopted since spring '08. Over 115,000 student users. And I think if you look at some of the venture backing that we've received anyway, it's a indication that the media industry is seeing this textbook industry going in a new and different direction. Bertelsmann is the largest media company in the world, is one of our investors. Random House, which is one of the largest publishing companies in the world, is also an investor. And so, we're seeing a real shift, I think, in the market dynamics here. Last note about bookstores before concluding. Lots of room for bookstores to be part of open models. I mean, I think bookstores are struggling with their own business model questions and issues. But I think that we've got, not only do we have sort of, opportunities for bookstores to purchase and sell books the way they do with any publisher, but we're also beginning to work with publishers to have them pilot print on demand operations. So they buy the print rights, and then a student orders a book, they print it right there on site and hand it over to the student a few hours later. It's great for the student who doesn't have to wait for shipping in some cases. It costs much less. It's better for the environment, etc. And finally, where do you get open textbooks? Well, there's lots of different resources, whether it's Connections, whether it's Merlot, whether it's Flat World Knowledge. I'll show you a list of others which you can have if you download the slides. And there's lots going on around the country, from Connections in Texas that I mentioned to CCCOER or CCCOTP, which are a couple different organizations in California around textbooks. Mokurai just put up a good one, the OER Recommender, which is basically a search engine of open content and textbooks online. The state of Washington is producing an open library of 81 courses over this year and next, funded by Gates Foundation and the state legislature, many of which will have open textbooks embedded. The state of Florida, University of Florida Press, partnered with the group and makes all their textbooks available under an open license called Orange Grove Texts Plus. And I think you'll start seeing a huge proliferation of open education materials because the Department of Labor is giving away $2 billion in grant funding over 4 years. Their first set of grants are already underway right now to produce educational curriculum that has to be openly licensed. And so we'll see an explosion of this kind of content, I think, over the coming few years. Here's a list of some other sites, from Global Text Project to the Assayer, to others. OER Commons is a good site for searching, where you can find more and more open content. So in conclusion, I guess my question when I talk to a group of people about this is we clearly have a problem with textbooks and a challenge, and it's sort of I took this from Dr. Steve Acker, a professor emeritus at Ohio State, who shared this with me, and it's sort of this notion of who killed Davy Moore. And for those of you who remember, it was a song that Bob Dylan sang about a boxer in the 1960s who died immediately following a bout. And the question was, who killed him? And was it the referee that could have stopped the fight, the angry crowd that the referee said, well, the crowd wanted me to keep going to get their money's worth? Was it the manager who could have thrown in the towel but didn't want to? Was it the gamblers? Was it the other boxer? And of course, everybody blamed somebody else for the problem. And I think the same question could be asked about who owns textbook prices. Do students have some responsibility? Can they stand up and organize themselves and demand a difference? I think the answer is yes, as you can see the student doing on a campus there. Do bookstores have a role? I think so. Librarians have an interesting role to play. I think they've got the most experience with licensing of content and open content. Legislatures could pass legislation trying to create more even playing fields. Publishers certainly have an obligation. They're probably in the best position to solve the problem through market means, and ultimately faculty are the ones who make decisions about what textbook to use, and by opting to use open textbooks, they're immediately being a part of solving the problem. So with that, I think I will conclude and just open it up to going back to some of the questions that I guess, Marty, you'll moderate, and we'll try to get through some questions.
There was, let me see if I can get the themes down, and people please correct me if I'm wrong. There was one theme about how do instructors reference open textbooks from within a CMS, for example, Moodle and Blackboard.
So there's a couple of different ways to think about that. Certainly some of the supplemental materials, like if you take a test bank, for example, and I can only really speak to the way we do this. I can't speak to sort of what you might find, for example, at Connections or at a different repository. But for our stuff, if you find a book, it'll have a test bank, and that'll be available in a compatible format for almost all major LMSs like Moodle, Sakai, Blackboard, etc. And so you can download it. As far as the textbook itself goes, there's options. So one way you could do it is you could sort of just put a link in from your course to the open textbook URL, and the student could go to the high-level URL and then choose whether to read it online or whether to purchase something. You could also take links from the chapter or section levels and embed them directly in your syllabus. So you could say, hey, here's a reading, and point directly to a section, and it'll open up a new window, and the student will go right to that section of material. You could also embed the textbook in all the different formats directly in the learning management system, but that generally is done through a licensing relationship. So if the institution licenses the content from us, then we will turn over files, and they can be hosted locally behind the university's firewall inside the LMS, and the student could say, hey, I want to download Chapter 2 of the EPUB file, for example. And then we also do single sign-on integration. So where we do licensing arrangements with institutions, you could have a student be in your LMS and click a textbook link, and through single sign-on immediately go to a hosted site on our server, which we white label for your school, and then the student then lands on the browser-based reader and can access the material there, or they can click on any of the downloadable formats and immediately download them to their hard drives without having to log in again. So different choices depending on whether it's a individual faculty adopting or whether it's the institution licensing.
Thank you, Eric. And also there was a bunch of questions about if people are changing a textbook, what does that have to do with introducing errors, and what does that have to do changing the licensing, and do these changes get melded into the final text that gets shared?
Oh, good questions. So basically, just to review one thing I said and then expand upon it. So the way it works basically is we call it the canonical textbook, but there's the original book, and we'll call it Book X. And if you came along and said, I'm interested in adopting Book X, but I want to make some changes for my class, you'd click Adopt and Customize. And you would, in essence, be making your own copy of Book X. At that point, you'd be integrating your own changes into it. When you're done and you click Save and Publish, it's generating a unique book, and it's generating a unique URL where your book lives. And it's adding your course to a class finder on our website. So when a student from your class goes to your URL, they're getting your textbook with your changes. So, and like I said, the next person that comes along will come along to the canonical book and go through that same process, and their students will access their changes at BookX. Now, when you've done that, make changes to Book X, there is, of course, the risk that you would make some errors in doing that. And there's nothing that we can do about that. We actually have made the decision to allow you to have the freedom to do what you think is appropriate for your book. Now, we do attribute the material to you. So there is a design demarcation that says this paragraph was added by Professor Y. So you can distinguish between, or the student can, between original content and contributed or modified content. We will also, so now let me talk about what happens with those changes. So when you make changes to a textbook and you publish it for your class, two things happen with regard to ownership and licensing. The first is you're agreeing to publish that version and make it available under the same license under which you got it. So there's a share-alike provision in our open textbook. So you're in essence saying, I'm publishing this, I'm putting it under the same license under which I got it. But if you added original content to that book, say you added a new section of content that was yours, that copyright is yours. So you can add it to the book, which is licensed under the open license, but you retain the copyright to your original work. You can take that and go elsewhere and publish it and do whatever you want to do with it. Flatworld and our author do not have the right to take any of those changes you made and put them into the core canonical book. If you put something original in there, that's your work, and we don't have any more right than anybody else to take it and put it in the original, so it won't show up in the original. My two more comments on this, because it's a complicated area. The first is, beginning this summer, there'll be a new option for people who do make modified versions. So today, when you make them, they're just private for your class. Come this summer, you'll be able to say, I want to retain it as private for my class, or I would like to make my derivative available in the catalog for other people to review and potentially adopt, and here's what I did. So there'll be an opportunity to begin sharing derivatives. So for example, professor at UNH has taken our Introduction to Business book and added several chapters on sustainability and corporate social responsibility. That's a topic that I think would be of interest to others, and so if he so chose to share, others could adopt that version. And he'll actually get paid a small royalty. Our original author will continue to get paid their full royalty. And then finally, Tom's question, which is when you make changes to Book X, but then we publish Book X again, do the changes you've made have to be made all over again? And the answer is no. So that was actually the most challenging technology problem to solve, which was to, in essence, be able to have you take Book X, and we'll call it X1 that you made, Tom. So you've got X1 over there with your changes. And 2 years later, we publish X in a new edition. Well, we're able to generate a Delta report that says, hey, Tom, owner of X1, here's all the changes between our second version of X and your X1 version. And then we say, hey, do you want to take all of our changes and just discard yours because you like ours better? Do you want to discard ours and just keep yours because you like yours better? Or do you want to merge them and then resolve the individual conflicts? And so then you'll be given the opportunity to see where there are direct conflicts and choose to either keep your material or take the new modified version in our book. So there's a bunch of answers to a bunch of questions related to what happens when you make changes.
One person, here's Michelle too, asks, can you walk us through the process of selecting an author and peer review for one textbook? Or do we have time?
No, I mean, I think, let me just ask the question. Maybe Michelle could just fire off a yes or no. So you're asking how does Flatworld select its authors and what's the review process that book goes through before we publish the, okay, great. So the answer was yes. So we basically do this just like a traditional publisher. So we get lots of manuscript proposals for various courses, which we review all of them. But we generally publish most of our books by going out and, in essence, soliciting a specific author to write a book. So we have a list of courses we want to publish for, and our acquisitions editor and the editors that work for him will come up with a list of sort of top 25 potential authors for a particular title based on scholarship, research citations, teaching history and awards, and we'll or previous textbook publishing success in a related area. So, for example, our first book we ever published was a book on advertising by Mike Solomon. Well, Mike has a book on consumer behavior and principles of marketing at Prentice Hall. He's a renowned expert in the area, but he had never written an advertising book. So those are the kinds of ways we profile an author. And then we basically approach them and basically try to find the right person who's got the right energy and enthusiasm for doing it, who wants to publish it under the open model. And then we eventually locate the right person and sign an exclusive contract with them. After that, we go through a pretty traditional editorial process. So we will usually have about 40 to 50 peer reviewers take a look at the high-level kind of proposal, table of contents, first couple of chapters to try to get a sense of whether this is a useful book. Is it going to fit curriculum? Does it add anything new? Is the tone and style and level at the right level, etc.? And then we'll, from there, basically usually have 8 to 10 peer reviewers per chapter selected on more specific content expertise, reviewing every chapter as we go through. And then we have an editorial, development editor reading the book and providing feedback along the way, etc. So that's pretty much the process of selection and review.
There's also a series of questions. How do people find books to use for their own classes? What can they preview them? Where do they go? And all of those neat things. And one person's looking for history in particular.
Yeah. So so the answer about how to, at least for I mean, if you're looking in general, some things like OER Commons are good search engines generally to look across. If you're looking for a Flat World Knowledge book in particular, you can certainly go to flatworldknowledge.com, and there's a link there called Catalog. And from there, you'll be able to access any of the books. So if you click on, you can search by topic, and if you click on a book, there's a Read Now button. And you can just click that and start reading the entire book for free online. You don't have to register or anything. If you want to get a desk copy, a print review copy to be able to review it, or you wanted to get a downloadable version, like an EPUB version for your iPad, then you sign up for an educator account and request the book, and then we'll go ahead and validate that you're indeed a valid educator at that institution. And once we do, which is within 24 hours, we'll go ahead and either download that to your account or send you a print review copy.
And Brenda asked, are all the books college level, or do they also offer secondary and remedial texts?
Yeah, so let me talk about the catalog and the breadth or lack thereof of the catalog. I mean, one of the challenges in launching a venture like this is the cost of producing each individual textbook. And so so we can't produce a full curriculum of textbooks by any means. So what we decided to do was first start in business and economics. So our first 26 books we published were all business and economics titles. And once we had proven that there was really a viable business and financial model there, we went out and raised a second and third round of capital and started to expand the catalog. And where we're strategically trying to expand is across the highest enrolled general education courses. So if you look at, there's about 125 courses, and you could sort of think of what they are in your head, right? Introduction to psychology, sociology, English composition, college success, the entire sort of developmental mathematics sequence from elementary algebra through calculus, biology, chemistry, economics, etc. And so if you look at those 125 courses, about 60% of the dollars that are spent for textbooks in the United States are spent in those 60 classes. 125 classes. So that's really where we're focused right now. We've published about another 15 titles now that are in some of those core areas like psych and soc and English comp, college success, elementary algebra, chemistry. And we'll continue to publish across that top 125. We do have a U.S. history 1 and 2 book coming out for that person who had that specific question. I don't know if it's listed on the catalog. We usually list those about 3 months out. But there is one fairly far along in the pipeline. We also have a Spanish book, an introductory Spanish book, an introductory German book under contract and in development, but not yet published. We're not really focused. We're really focused on college-level books, although certainly those books for that developmental curriculum can find their way into high school as well, as can things like U.S. history books, etc. So, if anybody has a specific question, one thing I can do and put it in the chat right now is put my email address and my phone number. And I can certainly get to you or have someone send to you a list of titles that are forthcoming that go beyond what's in the catalog so that you can have a sense of what's in the pipeline and when it might come out. So I'm sending that right now, and you can certainly feel free to contact me. And I'm going to, there we go. And I can get that information. There's also James just asked about, said I'm thinking about writing a book for my classes, but not in those common courses. If you're interested in the model, we're definitely interested in talking because we're not 100% exclusively focused on those. So we're pretty opportunistic, and when there's the right project and a good course and a great author, we'll publish it. For example, we're coming out with a genetics book pretty soon from University of Colorado, and it just happened to be an all-star team of geneticists and a great project and reviewed phenomenally well. And so while it wasn't on our 125 list, it was certainly a valuable book to have on the list. So we're not completely dogmatic about that 125. It's generally where we're trying to focus.
And
Marty, somebody asked if we could just give you that list and distribute it to participants. I'd be happy to do that. So.
yeah, Kelly just asked me if she could do that, and yes, please send me the list, and we will post it. The portal for the online teaching conference will soon be open. We're still putting some of the final touches on it, and part of the portal, my tongue and my brain aren't too well synced today. There are VR vendor booths, and there is one for Flat World Knowledge, and there'll be a whole bunch of resources, and it'll be downloadable there.